I shoot a shot. I'm coming in. Coming in. Shoot that. Hey, why not? Hey.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Flame Keepers podcast. We're here for episode 2. I'm Royce, and today I'm joined by two amazing people, the one and only Chris and Torie Custer. We're going to be discussing some really amazing, critical insights into their journey over the past several years. And so they're here to bless us with their story and kind of what they've learned, where the Lord has led them in and through over the past little bit of time here. And so, Chris, Torie, how you doing?
Good.
I'm doing great.
Good.
I thank you, Mr. Royce Walker, for the
Ooh.
generous introduction. I have my beautiful wife, Torie, today. She will occasionally pop onto these podcasts because she's interested in what we're doing. But definitely was excited for Royce and I to kind of take it by the horns and just run with it. So much in his nature to do something like this. So I'm excited to have my bride here. Like Royce said, we are going to share the 3-year journey of us coming up here to North Carolina, entering a group that there's going to be a lot of dialogue around that and a lot of interesting things that we discovered along the way. But even as we got out of that group, putting terminology and language to what we experienced and what we went through, a lot of healing, a lot of freedom, a lot of liberty after this last year of us being out. So we felt like it was time for us to share our story, because there have been a lot of family, a lot of friends that we had been disconnected from, who really didn't know what happened. And so this is our opportunity, because if you do know Torie and I, we're very transparent, always have been, very vulnerable. So a lot of people just know what's going on in our lives. And if those last 3 years that we were in this group, you didn't know a lot of what was going on, there's a lot of reasons. There's backstories why. And that's why we're here today, with another purpose of hopefully helping and equipping the body of Christ to look at certain signs that might be in leadership, that might be in your peers, that might be in the group that you're facilitating with, that could be very harmful, through manipulation, through narcissism, through cult-like structures that do exist in the body of Christ, in Christianity, that Torie and I honestly we didn't have a lot of experience in. We both grew up in really, strong Christian churches, as far as like when I got born again and her experience. So that's just a little review, but we'll dive in. I'm going to let Frank kick it off, and we'll just go from there.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to kind of catch you up from the very beginning in a quick way, back in 2019, Chris and I really got stirred up by the Holy Spirit in such a fresh new way. Like you said, I've been following the Lord a really long time. And so whenever you go through ups and downs, those like mountaintop and valley experiences with the Lord, it's really sweet to get back to that intimate place and hear his voice in such a way that brings direction and purpose to your life. And I was at that place needing that purpose-driven life while being a young mom. And anyway, I did hear the Lord in a very confident just voice saying like he was going to move us to the mountains of North Carolina. And in that purpose, I didn't know quite exactly what that looked like. And so I gave Chris a
period of time
it was
to hear from the Lord.
Yeah. It was 8 days to hear from the Lord to see if that was something that the Lord was actually breathing on, to get that confirmation, especially from the head of the household, to hear the same thing.
So she didn't give me like any indicators, no clues. It wasn't like, guess who? There were no clues. She said, "Hey, I heard something from the Lord. I want you to just seek Him and see what you hear in 8 days."
Mm-hmm.
And I came back to her on the 8th day with, the Lord is going to move us to the mountains of North Carolina. And so that's what she heard. And then after that, we just started, hearing confirmations through strangers and people we didn't know. And, we attended a worship service at Upper Room in Dallas. And what I heard specifically was we were going to move in the springtime on the first day of spring, which was March 19th, 2020. And we went to the Upper Room worship night. And this little girl, I say little girl, young woman, gets up on the stage and start singing verbatim, "The Lord is moving into the mountains into the springtime," over and over for a couple minutes. She was just on repeat singing that song over the church. And so we had scenarios and situations like that were just starting to confirm. She heard it, I heard it, and then it was just outwardly coming towards us that we were going to move to Hendersonville, North Carolina.
Yeah, so in that, we also knew a family who moved out here that we were very in close relationship with on like a mentorship level. We knew them for about 10 years at the time.
Yeah.
And we had met them through some of my very close friends that I've known since high school. And I asked, for a reference of who she would recommend when Chris and I started to go through the process of getting engaged and married. And so this was the couple that we connected in relationship with them and their family. And they had moved away
A couple of years.
a few years later to North Carolina. And so
yeah, so the couple came highly recommended from dear friends, like Torie's saying. We were looking for people to mentor us in our marriage on from a biblical standpoint. We weren't just looking for any mentors, but just like Christian mentors that we would look up to, that have kind of gone before us, have kids that are older, been married X amount of years, just the normal criteria that you would look for in someone to disciple you, essentially. And they had it. They really did. From our perspective, we really didn't know them. We just took the recommendation and ran with it. And so we got to a rhythm where I would say we spent once a month we'd meet with them, give or take.
And it was always really us pursuing them in that relationship. Like if Chris and I hit like a bump in the road, like we would go to them and talk to them, or getting, life advice, we would go to them. They would come to like my baby showers or wedding stuff, things like that. But again, it was never like,
they were at our wedding and prayed over us.
Yes.
That's the couple, Royce.
Mm-hmm.
Down and prayed over us.
Yep.
And so it looked like that. As far as like friendship and lifestyle relationship, that wasn't at that point yet. And so,
right. Like we would call her like friends because of, we exposed our life and they knew everything about us. And so very vulnerable, very transparent. So you only let your friends into that close area of life. So we just didn't have day-to-day or week-to-week encounters with these people, but just those bi-monthly touch points.
So like I said, back in 2019, the Lord was doing a lot of work in us and through us. We started to a little get together at our house through Gateway, and it was like a Shabbat dinner with local friends. And it was just like nonstop, like pursuing the Lord in relationships. And in September of 2019, the group that we became a part of down for a conference. And so in that period of time, we reconnected and just realigned with them and saw that like there was this group of people of like 20. Most of them were their family, like their sons, daughters, and spouses, and some siblings. They all showed me like that they were on fire for God and that they would talk about the Lord all the time. And it was like super attractive that like
Oh, yeah.
our age group of people love the Lord. And it felt like whenever Chris and I started the small group, it was like sometimes pulling teeth to get people to like join in on what we were feeling from the Lord. Right? And it was like easy with this group because it was just like it clicked. Okay, this is real for us.
Yeah. We want and we do live a life that is fully centered around the Lord. Conversations at the table, on the couch, in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. And so we came across this group, and we knew this mentor couple of ours. They, from what we've encountered over the 10 years of knowing them, they were very much the same. And so when we came around the group in 2019, it just like it matched. They were interested about the things of the Lord. They were just pursuing Him as hard as they could.
They were already in North Carolina.
From what we could tell, right? We didn't live with them, didn't know them. It was just an encounter that we were like, wow, this looks great. And they're already kind of starting a house church model, which that was already on our hearts. I'm not one to like have to go recreate the wheel. We sat down and we were like, if they're already doing something and we're hearing this word, why don't we just go join what they're doing and multiply into it, right? We want to see multiplication in the kingdom. And so there was so much excitement.
Yeah.
I mean, so much crying because the Lord, like we just felt Him on everything with the move.
When we had the yes to go, it was very quick process. So we literally got up into North Carolina within like 6 months. So when we got here, we had a soft landing by the leaders to come and live with them in their basement. And it was honestly like a sweet answer to prayer because North Carolina's homes and stuff are a lot different. So it allowed us to get acclimated to the environment, what kind of housing market was, also to do life with them and just really like dive in, just to become part of the culture that they already established.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with like North Carolina or the Midwest, basements are huge.
Yeah.
Some of them are, fully finished out living areas, bedrooms, secondary living rooms. So they had like multiple bedrooms down there, a bathroom down there. So, when we say basement,
it's like another little house.
It is, and some people just don't realize.
And we were living down there with a whole other family, so that's how big it was. Like our family of 5 with their family of 5. So
it was huge.
It was big.
So I want to kind of just like pause real quick because there's obviously like you said once you got that yes, there was quick movement.
Yeah.
Were there any questions of like how long they had been doing that or what the fruit of the ministry was, what the governance of those were you guys asking those kind of questions, or was it just kind of like a honeymoon phase where there's stars in your eyes and let's just go, or was there any like kind of checks and balances from you guys in that time?
Oh yeah, there were checks and balances for sure. So we came and visited after we heard. We came to visit in November, and this was kind of like we already knew we were moving. So we were moving regardless if it was with this group or not. Since we already knew people and they were already doing things that were on our heart, it's just 1 + 1 = 2. And it just seemed like it was on the path. So the checks and balances came in when we were visiting, and we started asking questions such as, who are you aligned with, or who do you submit to from an authority structure? Your house church, do you answer to anybody? when I say submission or authority, I'm not talking about I'm talking about the governance of the kingdom, right? It's always healthy to be able to get checked, right? By a brother, by, peers. It's not always like the hierarchy, but I'm saying, you have anyone you answer to for what you're doing here? And first red flag, the leader just straight up was like, I don't have to answer that to you.
The second
Okay.
part was they were aligned with other people here in North Carolina that were in Charlotte, that were 2 hours away from where we lived. And they had done like conferences and helped set up things like that. But as far as the authority structure, no, they were aligned with the church out in, Denton, Roy Zion, but that was it. And then they had no peers or anything out here. So, no.
Yeah, everything was from a very far distance, and it wasn't for the relationships weren't to like check to make sure everything stays healthy.
Yeah.
They were relationships to, I would put it more along the lines of like, to maybe be seen as legitimate, but there's nothing there to like help protect this group of people who were kind of isolated from, when you're house church, you can be kind of isolated. So it's always healthy to have their groups and other peers and other people alongside of you. You don't go off the deep end. Right. And unfortunately, as the story unfolds, the deep end.
It's like you said though too. I mean, it's first red flag, right? So just because something has the shadow of legitimacy doesn't mean that it has the substance of legitimacy. Eldership, church governance, these things are in place for a reason in a healthy environment. And so, how long had they been kind of operating in this system that once you guys came into it?
About 4 years.
Okay.
Very small, 4 years, less than 20 people.
More immediate kind of family people, right?
Yes.
Yeah, children, sons and daughters,
their
spouses, and their grandchildren.
There were some new people moving up when we were moving up as well at the same time. And so a mother was moving up, another man was moving up that was single.
Another family.
A whole other family.
That wasn't related. So 2019, 2020, there was this wave of probably 12 other people, give or take, moving up to be a part of this. So we did see that as a sign.
Multiplication.
Yeah, this is great. There's adding unto. They were talking about there was talks of looking for maybe a building, seeing it multiplying.
A commune.
Yeah, wow. A building to come corporately worship. But
yeah. Well, one thing I will just say to kind of and I don't want to say like bring logic into the equation. I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's just practical wisdom. If you have an association or an organization that's run, you know, a largely family and adjacent relationships for like a 4-year period of time, and then over a season of time, they within a very short season of time, they about double, you know, 12 to 20, that's, you know, pretty significant. The probability that they're going to have the infrastructure and the relational dynamic to be able to catch that in a healthy way is just questionable. I wouldn't say it's more likely, less likely. It's just questionable. Like think about it, if any church that, you know, you go to, if twice, you know, if what would that be? Not quite twice as many. If 40% more people showed up on Sunday, would it press your systems? Would it press your facilities? Would it press what you have going on? And it's not the exact same, right? It's a micro level versus a macro level, but it has similar effects. And so I think that's something to just be, you know, you can look at it as far as multiplication, but you have the human factor in there. You have the organizational factor in there. And I think that'll play into how things unfold without me knowing the intricate details, because I'm coming into this conversation largely, not entirely, but largely the same way that most people who will be watching this is just kind of like, hey, I know some things, at an angular level, but not at a legitimate depth level. And so that's what we're kind of diving into. So I'm diving in with you guys. So okay, so it's you
Well,
guys
that's a
had
good
the
point.
conference. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for all the listeners, we have been very wise on who we have shared this with. And Royce, you were my best man at my wedding. You have heard bits and pieces, but we have really reserved this because there's a process that we attempted to walk out that would keep honor intact
and integrity
intact. So we, again, for a whole year, we have been very selective on what we have shared, who we have shared it with, and so, and how we've shared it.
Mm-hmm.
And so thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. So you guys had you had the conference, and then you went in, kind of did a little bit of a test run in November. There's this buzz. You've got some confirmation from the Lord in some pretty profound ways. So walking into like December, January, that new year of 2020, you're about to walk into a new season. Lo and behold, everyone was about to walk into a very unique season. You guys just had a little bit of an additional layer here, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more so. But what did that look like for you guys?
So I just want to add a couple more red flags real quick to what we saw in that visit. Was
there's a lot more.
There was a lot of beauty because of the community life, right? Like people were always at the main house that we were living at, the leader's house. You would cook together, clean up together, have dance parties. We would do Shabbat. Like there was great things that we were partaking in. However, in certain moments, you see segregation of men and women, where the men would be outside, the women would be inside talking, and that was often.
Yeah, it wasn't moments, because that's a natural tendency, I think.
Exactly.
Guys hang with guys, girls hang with girls, very natural tendency. But it was so beyond the natural tendencies of, I think, would just be human nature. It was like next level. That it was enough that made us go, something's interesting here. Like the women are always together, the men are always together. That was kind of the takeaway of our visit.
Well, and they would say, like, the leaders would say things like, oh, it's healthy that, the men and women are separated. Like, we need to let the men be men and the women be women. Like, they don't care about what we have to say, or, it was very, like, normalized of that segregation part. But like I said, we were also in groups too, what would you say was like another red flag? I would say like,
excessive drinking.
Yeah, I was about to say like excessive drinking that I used to. I did not drink that much at the time.
Yeah, hear me. Well, we do drink wine and beer and certain liquors, right? But we didn't live a lifestyle of like getting drunk ever. The when we walked away, because we kind of went up there on like a health kick too. We were like super healthy. I was training for Spartan races.
I had lost about 30 pounds.
We were in great shape, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
Yeah.
That's how we were coming up there. And we just kind of noticed that everyone drank excessive. Like it, and I don't know, maybe just because we were in town and people were kind of more laid back and having a good time associating with us. But I would say the level of drinking was a red flag as we walked away, going, okay, well, these are some things to watch out for. But I mean, this is very, very sensitive, but we would watch, and this is like a beyond a red flag. This is like burning purple-ish, but children drinking, little children.
Well, the parents wouldn't pay attention, or the babies would like grab a beer bottle or a Truly, and then they would like chug it, and there was times where you would have a little toddler drunk off of drinking.
Whoa!
I know, yeah. And it was
I
like
mean, I grew up.
we kind of brushed it off because we were like, well, maybe this was an accident.
Huh. No, I mean, I say whoa just because like I grew up in a very loose environment. I mean, me and Chris shared a lot of our stories, and I mean,
Same.
it's alcohol, and even in my instance, drugs were very, very commonplace. Um, I think there's probably some picture of me out there in a diaper and cowboy boots with a Budweiser can somewhere,
Yeah.
but never was it like there's this understood partaking, at least until my early, teenage years. I think 11 or 12 was when that became like an acceptable thing, which is absolutely abusive. Just to be clear, like that's not normal behavior. It shouldn't be seen as normal behavior at all, even at that age, but especially younger. That's very, very not just odd. I mean, not to dive into or psychoanalyze this a little bit too much, but I think just as a general
Okay.
note, really where there's I wouldn't even say an attempt. I would just say a continual necessity or a continual nature of separation,
Mm-hmm.
and also a emphasis of uh, lowered inhibition, or like what alcohol does, right? It lowers our inhibition. We're more willing to talk about things in a more loose way. We have
Yes.
um, we have less barrier whenever approaching. So it's a something that will neutralize social awkwardness and anxieties, and open up some
Yes.
room. So those two combined are pretty. They're potent. They're very potent ingredients, and they cause a lot of separation a lot of times. And understand that even though, Chris, like you said, it is absolutely a natural tendency for men and women to inhabit different spaces, anywhere that's
Yeah.
purposeful, especially within the context of a marriage. That's not to be treaded lightly, and especially
Right.
when it's also like, hey, not only is there an emphasis on separation, but there's also this emphasis of just like, hey, loosen up,
Mm-hmm.
and
Which we'll dive
that
more
can
into
be.
that because that is like a big part of some of the behaviors that come out through the drinking that you'll hear.
Yeah, and I mean, I can just see people asking, so you saw all these red flags, then why the heck did you join this group?
Mm.
And
No, I mean, yeah,
so
it's
I think it's a valid question. It's not one that it's literally just coming to my mind. And at the time, I would say we were analyzing everything and reviewing everything. And we had a belief that we could come and change things.
Mm-hmm.
We really did. And we had a belief that we would come and shake things up
Mm-hmm.
for the good. Not in a negative way or like a mean way, but just like things that were out of order, we could come and like help identify those areas as like, hey, like, the hockey check, you need to get checked right here. This is off.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like the authority thing. I was kind of shocked that, he answered that way, and it was a lot longer conversation, but that was the answer he provided, was like, I don't have to tell you who I submit to, who I have that helps me, guide this thing.
mm.
And so those were red flags. I think that covers the red flags for the most part.
Mm-hmm. We were
Yeah, I
coming up
think
on
it's
the.
easy. Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
I was just saying, like, we were coming up here on the word of the Lord, not based off what people were doing, but we knew we were on that path to come up here regardless. And
Yeah.
so just being obedient was where we were in that state of
Mm.
mind. So,
Yeah,
I
I
remember
think a
going
couple
back.
things.
We
Oh, go
can
ahead.
make a change. We were saying that to each other, like,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah,
our part is needed.
mm-hmm.
That's what we were thinking.
yeah,
However,
yeah,
we'll get
yeah.
more into
Well,
that.
yeah, with the combination of the heart of a leader, I guess I could just call it that. The combination of like, hey, like, I've always been a big proponent of, if you're critical of something, if God's given you an eye to see something that's kind of off, He's probably stirring in you some type of a passion. You can see that as a lens that might lead into calling. But it shouldn't be, the end all be all to like, oh, I'm just critical of something and therefore I see something that's broken and I need fixing it. In the same way that I wouldn't recommend for, a young woman who's pursuing, a young man who, has a lot of issues and her mindset is I can fix him. I'm not going to say would be a healthy thing to pursue if that's the way you're going into it. But anyway, with I think submissive and humble leadership, that has a lot more of an opportunity to take root and to induce change. Not only do I see that biblically, but also I see that as it pertains to just my own experience. But when you kind of have a lack of humility, or maybe even just like a stiff-necked, and we can call it whatever we want. It may be just a little bit more of an old school leadership mentality, because I do know, generations before those kinds of conversations were like, hey, you got to purchase the real estate to ask that question. And, I get that. I'm not that way personally. I don't see how Jesus was that way necessarily. But I get how people, could come to that conclusion. But
Sure.
The combination of those elements, though, would lead me to probably kind of like, hey, there's maybe a little bit more under the surface that needs not only investigation and introspection on our part, but a lot of conversation with people who really care way more about your relationship with the Lord than they do your opinion of them and of that situation. Not to say, and I don't want you guys to feel, or anyone who may be in that situation, that feel like it's like the wrong step, or you did the wrong thing, or, oh my goodness, there's so many red flags. It's like, yeah, but if you were, statistically speaking, if you were a youth in Nazi Germany, the likelihood that you would have been a Nazi is very high. So the worst of evils can befall us because of all of these different influences. Being in the moment, having especially that inspiration of the Lord's leading us here, is very, very powerful. And I think our desire to really belong and to be engaged with that extended family, and whatever, we call that family church. A lot of people call that family a lot of different things. Our human desire that drives that is extremely powerful. Extremely powerful.
Yep.
So you guys are in that space and you're in that and you see some things. Hey, maybe we can be the change that we want to see in this space. There's some stuff, but we can kind of work through it. And we know the Lord's calling us to North Carolina. That's what we're holding our ground on. And so pick it up from there.
Yeah, and I think belong, that definitely brings up a good point, is Torie and I both always wanted to find a group of people in such a way that like kingdom brothers and sisters, spiritual parents, the whole structure, and we thought we did. We really did. So we move up there, and we're told kind of upon entry that we have a 2-week sabbatical to like just chill, enjoy the area, get moved in. Then it begins, and we're like, okay. Like, I remember my zealous self was like, no, let's start up right now. Let's go. Not realizing even what this leader was referencing.
Yeah, and like with me and the women, I would say I was wanting to help cook or clean, and they were just like, no, you can't. You're not really like going to do that right now. Like, you just rest and enter in. And that was challenging for me because I'm so hands-on and willing to help and serve whenever. And so I would sneak in a little, here and there to help out, but it wasn't recommended in that sabbatical to do really anything. So, just kind of following that lead of just entering in.
Just super chill. It was.
Yeah, no, I think so. Just because of the proximity, I want to say this because I think it's super important, because I don't know how many people like catch this kind of stuff. Whether it's happening purposefully or not happening purposefully, there is a social indebtedness that's happening in that season. You're becoming, you're becoming, it's not, it may not be nefarious, it may be nefarious, but there, if at whatever time there's this relational input or equity that a lot of times we associate with what we do, right, and what we can bring to the table or bring to the community, and it's like, hey, chill on that. We're just going to invest and invest and invest, and we're going to deposit and deposit and deposit. You can rest assured that the demand for the withdrawal will come, and that you will have a sense of indebtedness. So I deal with church culture, I deal with church people, I deal with non-church people, vacations, times to rest. I could talk about sabbatical all day long. That's a different animal than entering into a community and immediately, being put in a place of social indebtedness. So go ahead.
Yeah, and you're right on. Just wait. We haven't even.
Yeah. I love that it's kind of unfolding, like with us having to reveal that, because what you're saying is spot on.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that until after we got out, what that actually meant. So
put language to it. So.
Well, I don't come to those conclusions just in my own mind. Yeah. So I've worked with a lot of different trauma victims within a lot of different situations, whether it be sex trafficking or drugs or relationships or whatever it may be. But just there's these similarities that happen through all of these dysfunctional things that kind of tell the tale, in the same way that, if you have a 10-year-old little boy who's bullying other people, there's a very high likelihood that you're dealing with a little guy who's got a lot of insecurities and a lot of hurts. Those are signs, and so there's these signs socially as well. So
keep adding this, because this is great. So we moved up there, do the 2-week sabbatical, and pretty much as it ends, we start seeing the patterns of how they operate. And we didn't get that during the visit because it was a lot more just hanging out, leisure, relaxed. And we start seeing that the men, and we knew this prior, they're building a home. They're building the leader's son's home for him and his family. It's, 15 minutes down the road. Cool concept. Teaching all the guys construction. Nobody knew how to hold a hammer, is what they would claim. Teaching them electrical, plumbing, every aspect, drywall, painting, you name it. And so got a group of guys that are Monday through Sunday, every single evening, working construction.
Except Friday. Friday was Shabbat.
Friday night Shabbats were the reserved evenings that they would not have the guys work on it. So I enter into that, and I start asking questions of, do you guys ever just take a break? I understand the concept of, helping a brother out and, seeing someone succeed. Love it. However, we're going till 10:30 at night every day. We go to our regular jobs and then get over to the house and work 6 days a week. Every day.
And here I am, like, used to our family structure where we come from Dallas, Fort Worth. And so we're in that entertainment world. Chris and I weren't so much involved in that style of busyness, but we were used to hanging out on the weekends together as family if he was working during the week, right? And so now my husband's gone 6 days a week, it's completely shifted my paradigm, where now I'm with these other women who I now consider sisters in the Lord, and their kids, and we're just doing life together while our husbands are completely away. And you're just trying to figure out, like, this
is that separation that we were picking up on. Sitting. And the guys are always building together. We work Monday through Friday, and then we go to the construction job sites.
Which also, I just want to add, like, I thought it was really cool too that they were doing this for their brother, or the leader was doing it for his son, and these men were learning stuff to, like, actually see the fruit of like a house being completely finished and then a family can move in.
Yes.
And it was done at like a very, you know, methodical, like financial standard that the leader saw. And it wasn't bad. Like it was
No.
honestly very profitable for this couple. And I was just like, wow, this is incredible. Like that these men devote this time and these women too, because we're sacrificing as well, to see this family get into a home. So there is an aspect of beauty in that. However, through the time frame of our stay, it became a huge issue.
Well,
Yeah.
we started. I started asking questions like, "Do you guys like rest from this?" And I remember getting, completely criticized because I asked that question, and they would say things like this: "You have an old definition of Shabbat or Sabbath or rest. You need to learn how to rest in Jesus all the time, even when you're working."
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then, yeah, that's the new revelation of rest. And
As well as the law of love.
and then the second commandment, right? So the leader took the second commandment to love your neighbor as yourself and emphasized upon it and said to love your brother more than your own life
So that you could see him
so
succeed.
you can see him succeed. This became the banner of this group. Okay? What I mean by that is this is what would drive everybody to go build the homes. And if where it stopped getting cool is if you wanted to take your wife on a date, you'd get crucified for that.
Yeah.
Or if we have to visit in
If you wanted
town.
to spend time with family, take your kid. No, forget the visit. Yeah. I mean, any
Okay,
reason
so
for missing.
yeah, the two parts, right? The native Texan in me, number one, and then the
Go ahead,
just
Texan.
yeah, the man that is a husband and a father in me just rises up in that. And here's what I'll say, just in that regard: you say no, it is socially unacceptable whenever it comes to the prioritization of your family.
Yep.
I'm out. I mean, I may not be like out like entirely, but I'm definitely out of that conversation. So I had this fun encounter with somebody who was arguing free will, and he was saying you don't have free will because he said if I tell you to think of a country, you can't think of a country that you don't know of. And I said, no, you're confusing free will with absolute will, number one. But number two, I have free will, and here's how I know I have free will. When you tell me to think of a country, I tell you, screw you, I'm not playing your stupid little game.
Yeah.
That's the exorcism of my free will, or the exercisation of my free will, right? So there's something that just rises up in me, especially whenever it comes to, now you have to, and I'm not saying turn this into a crutch, right? Because there is times where people do that. But when you want to prioritize your family, you want to prioritize time with your kids, you want to prioritize time with your wife, if a situation puts pressure on you to not do that, that should at least be a scent, if not an entire dung pile of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, but I don't want to stop there, but it's a very important point. As men also, husbands, fathers, fight for those spaces in every space that wants to crouch in and take it from you. I don't care. It's never flesh and blood. Okay. It's always principalities, powers. And the reality of the adversary is there's, Ephesians 5 says that marriage is a great mystery, that there's this union of two people. It's a metaphor, a shadow of the Holy Spirit's union with us and Christ. And it's the closest thing to heaven that we get. And so anything that tries to separate that, it's immediately gone out of a human relationship and into a spiritual dynamic. And if, as a man, we have to fight for that. And not only do we have to fight for that, but it will also embolden our wives to see that space that way as well. Even though, and just to be completely honest and frank about this, our wives are, usually very, very intuitive without our leading in that space. Women are extremely capable on their own, but it's just that posturing of like, no, you're not going to take this space. And if you think you're going to take this space, that's a cute game, but absolutely not.
Yeah.
So just wait, because it gets more intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to everyone listening, to echo what Royce just said, husbands, fathers, fight for your family.
Yeah.
Do not bend over and yield to anyone who calls himself a leader, or if you call them a leader, for the sake of your family. Do not.
Yeah, as a family ministries pastor, right, I am a champion of families. I'm not a model. It doesn't mean I'm a model husband. It doesn't mean I'm a model father. It just means I'm held with more responsibility than a lot of people in those spaces. But I hate to say this, but even when, and maybe even especially when, the pressure of what you may have to find yourself kind of opposing in some spaces is spiritual in nature. Don't forget that the enemy was an angel of worship and of light, and that he still uses that inroad, and sometimes extremely effectively. And that's why it's on us leaders to be extremely humble and carry our cross, and to know that we're following Jesus. He's the shepherd. He's the pastor. I'm not the pastor of any church, and there are no pastors. There's one good shepherd. The rest of us are sheep. Some of us just get more responsibility than others. And unfortunately, if we get that out of alignment, so if you're in leadership, like, hear me say this, like, if your position is that someone's service to the ministry that you have authority over is greater than the ministry to their family, you're dead wrong. You're dead wrong biblically. You're dead wrong ethically. If you've been taught that way, I'm so sorry that you've been taught that way. It's unbiblical. The first ministry of an elder, of a believer, is his family. And that's first and foremost. And sometimes that means that we find ourselves in compromising situations, even when it comes to our service to the church. And that's sometimes not due to the overpressing nature of the leader. Sometimes, and I hate to say this, but I've seen this situation happen as well. Sometimes that's our own insecurities to want to be valued and to feel valuable to others in the kingdom. And so we
to interject, the value is so high there of this spiritual mother and father with children aspect. So as kids, like Chris and I came in there willing to submit to new leadership, that this was the model that they had. So we wanted to fall in line. And for me, I was like, I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid, and I'm going to do it because I'm my first child and I'm a perfectionist and people pleaser.
And I'm not.
It just drives a little bit.
I don't care what people think, to a healthy standard. I will ask questions to understand, and that doesn't fly. And I began to have so much resistance and confrontation with the leaders because I was asking questions as simple as, do we rest? Do we, is there a day that we don't go work construction on a Saturday, spend time with our families?
They were on a time frame, so that answer was no. You can do whatever you want. However, we need you, and this is what it looks like to serve.
Well, they would spiritualize it. They would create spiritual language to convince you what they were doing was of the Lord.
And this is where manipulation and control came in, high control.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
You got to be a good boy and girl and listen to mommy and daddy in these situations. Otherwise, you will get mocked, crucified openly or behind the scenes on not falling in line. And I would get talked to privately about Chris having these questions on, him questioning authority. Okay, here Chris has issues with authority now. Chris doesn't want to listen. Chris is listening. However, he just has a lot of questions. So you're not answering his questions. Therefore, he comes back to me and is talking to me about stuff that I would bring back to our leaders and talk to them about it. Or they would be like, hey, notice Chris is off today. Why is that? And I would go, well, it's because he doesn't agree with the whole not being able to spend time with us on a Saturday. This is just like one
Yeah.
scenario, very, very many more situations, but this is what it would look like. And so
she's getting private conversations with the leader or leaders while I'm not there, and they're talking about me, and they're beginning to demonize me.
they would use that word.
Yeah, that I was having demonic thoughts.
Oh, wow.
Yep. I had issues with authority, and I don't listen. And I'd come home at the end of the workday, 10:30, 11 at night, and she would be so frustrated at me,
Well, yeah.
going, why are you doing this? Why are you questioning them?
Why are you making it so difficult
making
for
this
us?
so difficult? You just need to go in. And I was like, honey, this is not healthy. This is not
So
okay.
let me kind of just figure out where we're at in the timeline, because I mean, is this like, you know, you have your 2 week sabbatical, first 3 months. Okay, so this is you guys moved in, you said March 19th of 2020. So this is like March through May, essentially, where you're kind of observing this and your family's acclimating. You guys are in a little bit of a culture shock. I mean, I know there's a ton of differences between DFW and the Carolinas. I mean, really DFW in a lot of places. And so you're not only going through that, but you're also going through a pretty polarizing
lifestyle shock.
Everyone's shut in
even just
too.
a
It's
micro.
2020. We're literally shut in together.
Yeah. So okay, so
COVID. It's COVID time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay, there's a ton to unpack there. I don't want to derail us. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, everyone was, you know, getting the timeline right. Yeah, because it's just really important, you know, somewhat anecdotally, but not exactly. Never underestimate your own ability to be wrong. And that goes on both sides of the equation. And questions are the key indicator of, and there's a difference between asking questions and questioning.
Right.
I'll be really honest with you too. If you can't deal with the questions that are being asked, be ready to be questioned, because you should be. If you're asked or confronted with a question, and your genuine answer to that question is, man, I just really don't know. Maybe that's not healthy. Maybe we really do need to rethink this, or tell me more. Help me understand where you're coming from. If that's not my language and I'm just defensive, questioning's easy. And, you know, for what it's worth.
It was always he would never answer a question. He would always propose a question back to you.
Sure. Porcupine.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
a term, by the way, for those that you don't know that.
Yeah, and so eventually, what would happen as he flipped a question back to you, your question would then become an issue within you, and all of a sudden, you're being gaslit. You are quite literally being. When you're bringing an issue up to him, saying, "Hey, I don't think this is right," he will internally and psychologically flip this back onto you, and it's a you issue, not a group issue, not a him leadership issue. It's a you thing.
And so, since we're there to learn, right? We're here to be spiritually mentored and taught. I would take that as, okay, let's self-reflect, because Chris and I are very self-reflective type people. We try to humble ourselves as much as we can and learn. And so I was like, well, maybe we just don't have it right. We don't have this revelation yet of doing what y'all do in this manner. And so he would kind of have to sit back a minute and reflect, like, am I thinking correctly, or am I not submitting? Right? So you're juggling these thoughts internally. So it's very difficult.
So let me throw this in there. Number one, so know your audience, I guess, would be the first thing. The last person that I would want to porcupine or kind of lead down the Socratic trail of questioning a question is someone who's classically trained as a door-to-door salesperson. That's a bad game to play, especially if they're worth their salt, which means that they spent more than 2 months making a living doing that thing. You don't want to get into that kind of game with those kind of people because they know how to dice down those questions and really get to the root of things. So know your audience. That's thing number one. But really with, thing number two, it's just, it goes back to that eldership. Who's an authority over this individual that if they're not being clear, where do you go that provides those answers? And if it's not there, man, that just says so much. So, I think that piece is so key for people to understand that if there's not an appeal to a higher authority, whenever it comes to some of these things, then you just have to really, I wouldn't even say tread carefully. I'd just say get out. I hate to be that blunt, but it's either that or you just got to go through your own, you got to go through your own misery for however many years or maybe forever. I don't know, So anyway,
3 months in and I'm telling her we need to leave.
Yeah.
And Torie does not want to leave.
I'm not ready to leave.
Okay.
I drank the Kool-Aid. I saw the beauty of community life, and I'm like, we can suffer and learn if we're missing it in certain areas.
But I'm like, we are being divided and separated actually in our marriage.
Yeah.
The way that I would describe it was the leader and her would have conversations at the table, just the two of them, without anyone even present. And these questions that he would ask or talk to her about would cause division between the two of us. And it always goes back to the garden. Everything goes back to the garden.
And Chris doesn't have what you have. And then they would start prescribing me books that were different than Chris.
Okay.
And so we were all prescribed different books at different times. And so you start kind of going on your own individual spiritual journey, right? And I felt, I'm not going to lie, superior than Chris because I thought I had more insight, more revelation. I knew more. I was receiving it better. Chris was being difficult. So here I am put in a position where I'm a big girl and then Chris is the bad child, right? The bad boy.
Yeah.
So
One thing. That's definitely what happens. So maybe two things. So one thing that's always been extremely helpful to me, and this is just, it goes back to the Bible, right? So just you measure something by its fruit. Mm-hmm. So for me personally, even that, difficulty doesn't mean bad fruit. Pressure is where anointing comes from. You can't get oil out of a seed without pressure. Okay. You don't get, diamonds from coal without pressure. Right? We all know those things, but the genuine nature of measuring a season is, you'll know a tree by its fruit. And if the fruit of a season or a situation or even a group, this could be just a small group, if the fruit of that thing is, the beginnings or even the more later stages of division, it starts, and you can see the progression here. And I know that it's different when you're living in it than when you're 50,000 foot above it, viewing it, hindsight, right? But there's the physical separation, there's the emotional separation and social separation, and then the spiritual separation. And when that's the telltale sign of the fruit, I always told people, the way that I measured calling, how was I confident in understanding that where I was in whichever season is where I'm supposed to be? I measure first the fruit of my marriage. Is my marriage being fruitful? And how I measure that is my wife's relationship with Jesus growing? I can internalize that too, but we get stuck there oftentimes. And so, and it's not that I said my wife because I knew that if she was in a space that was unhealthy, I had led her into that space or influenced her heavily into being in that space. So when I say my wife, really, I'm internalizing, but I'm using an external mechanism to examine myself and how am I leading. And then the fruit of my children were my children's relationship with God growing. And if the answer to that in each season was yes, then I knew that I'm in this space. So that's how I practically determined that. And so it seems like there's some cracks in the foundation, and then it's being leaned into even more through these book prescriptions and just these different journeys that you guys are being taken down.
It all like where I was very, very shocked was when he really pressed on looking like him, and how
Like
often
physically or like emotionally and spiritually? Okay.
because you want to look like your rabbi. And so
Cool.
from a Hebraic viewpoint was, disciples of a rabbi would follow the rabbi around, would lean over their shoulder, whatever they were reading, and read what they were reading, follow him into the bathroom. This is old ancient, discipleship. Not that anyone follows.
Yeah, if anyone asks you to follow them into the bathroom, we're done.
I really doubt that anyone followed him into the bathroom. Just knowing that whole group.
Well, let me ask you. Let me pause real quick, Chris, because I know there's some mention of some things that might be wildly unfamiliar for a lot of people that have been mentioned here, and there's a because we're talking about things like Shabbat, we're talking about things like Hebraic tradition. A lot of New Testament believers would be like, hold on, why are we doing? What's this Old Testament practice or stylization that you're talking about, and where does that come from? So can you shed a little bit of insight of what motivated these particular people in that particular direction, and how that was either attractive or what it added to, or how it influenced or supplemented what you guys were doing?
Yeah, so I can speak for our home. We got motivated to do Shabbats on pretty much we were exposed to it. She was exposed to it as a teenager, and early in my faith I was exposed to it. But it's the intentionality of sitting around the table with your family, blessing one another, honoring the Lord, worshiping in prayer, in spirit and truth. And so the concept of Shabbat doesn't have to be from a religious Old Testament standpoint. It's a Friday evening gathering of the family and friends and loved ones, and blessing everybody and just honoring the Lord. It's one of the best things we've implemented into our home. I love it.
And one of the churches that we were affiliated with back in Texas, which this is what the group came out of before it became Gateway, was Shady Grove. And Shady Grove Church, they honor Israel. They really got revelation on what it looks like to partake in that root of who Jesus is and what he has done. However, yes, he's fulfilled all the feasts and the law, but yet there is a revelation to see him in it. And so we took on that practice of Shabbat. The newer church, Gloria Zion, actually dives in deeper to doing all the feasts and Rosh Kadeshes. And we didn't know a lot about that until we met with them and practiced it. So
I don't know what got them all involved with it. I would say that back in Texas they did Shabbats, but I don't think they did Rosh Kadeshes and all the other Jewish celebrations.
They would do Sukkot.
Would they?
Yeah, they did Sukkot in their backyard.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not quite familiar. We knew them like at a monthly touch point. We didn't go to all the gatherings, and everything was facilitated at their home at the time.
But there was an emphasis of a Hebraic emphasis, a very Hebraic, kind of like lifestyle, following things like Jewish calendar. I don't think any of these things. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I think there are not only a lot of healthy systems, but I love it. It doesn't have to be Shabbat. It's an intentional time to recognize and glorify the Lord together as a family, as unique individuals. With our unique gifts and perspectives. And so anytime we're intentionalizing that on a daily, a weekly, Deuteronomy 6 would say, we do this, in these different rhythms of our day as a family. I think that's all great and healthy, but I think it's interesting to see sometimes, especially for us, maybe obviously, we were in our mid 20s, late 20s, coming into something that's while also like simultaneously ancient and new, and how that is then, I hate to say this term, but weaponized because it's intriguing to then create a centralization that gives this semblance, and I'll say it this way, that's something other than the cross and the supremacy of Christ. That's the draw. Like, that's a part of the potential of it, is that it takes it has the potential. I'm not saying this is exactly what it does. I'm just saying that in the wrong space and with the wrong emphasis, it can remove our eyes from the good shepherd and put it on an individual rabbi and say, hey, look at imitate me as I imitate Christ. And it's like, hey, cool, I don't have a mediator between God and man. And while community is important and mentorship is important and spiritual leadership is important, Christ is my ultimate example, which means that I'm going to serve him through you. So when you get weird, I'm still serving him. And you're not my standard.
That was a foundational thing that our leader would share, of like, imitate me as I imitate Christ. However, we, along the journey, recognize that we put that leader as Christ, because we were hearing through him the Lord, revelation every Saturday morning, for almost 6 hours at the table. And he was the one receiving what we needed. Our daily bread was bread that he would get.
But this is new terms. Like, you would never admit that in the group.
No.
You don't think that way in the group.
Yeah, because you're in it.
Yeah, when you're in it, you're just listening to this for 4.5, 5 hours on a Saturday morning, talk about his insights and his, what he would call, revelation of what he's getting from the Lord, from the Bible. Wasn't reading other books.
He would occasionally, like some of Gloria Zion books, but
no. But when I'm talking about revelation, he always emphasized it and connected it to the Bible. Sure. I'm just saying, like, other books outside of the Bible, he wasn't.
I think one of the greater maybe consequences of a little bit more modern society, I recognized this a lot when I moved to Kansas and I started being in church here. I'd have people in their 30s, I was in my young 20s and a little bit older, that would tell me just, man, you know so much. And I was like, dude, I've been a Christian for like 6-7 years. Like, I don't know very much at all. But what I realized was they only had the opportunity to, in the way that they thought about hearing the word of God, or really hearing the word of God explained, they had to be in a place at a particular time. Like, they had to go to a church and listen to a preacher. And I, the early days of, they weren't even podcasts, they were just recordings online, and I would dive into a bunch of stuff. And so on a week to week basis, I might hear, 20, 30 sermons a week and kind of parse them out. And I think that's a great benefit now that leads less to this individual person, this like Moses of the day that goes up the mountain to hear from God and brings the word down to the people. And I think that kind of thing flies in the face of what Jesus really provides for us when he said, look, you're not going to ascend the mountain. I'm going to bring the mountain to you. And everyone's invited.
Yeah, let me explain. We'll get past the 3 months here in a second, but just talking about that special revelation he was getting, he would encourage all of us as a group to go home, you read your word, you have quiet time, you spend time with the Lord, and then on Saturdays, the goal was to come back and share as a group what everyone's getting. Okay?
Which, that's exciting. We love that. Here we are.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Talk about Jesus, like, in that dialogue.
This is like why we moved up. I love this. Yeah. That dialogue is absolutely fire. I love it. Come and share the intimacy and the goodness of the Lord that you're getting, with loved ones, with other fiery ones. However, for a whole year, the group does this. And for a whole year, he says that we aren't receiving revelation.
This was 3 years at the end of our 3 years that he said this.
Well, for one specific year, he really pushed on this idea and this thought process. And at the end of the year, he sits everyone down. And I mean, we're going week to week to week where you get to the table and nobody wanted to say anything because of timidness, fear.
Yeah.
Well, because it would be
It would
scrutinized.
be scrutinized. So when someone would share something,
It was either insight or just like a nugget. It wasn't revelation, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a person who deals with as a person who deals with young people quite a lot, you know, I it's kind of equal parents and kids now. I'm very sensitive, always have been very sensitive to the difference between brainwashing and teaching people to think for themselves. When there's that constant cynicism. Now, there's certain times where people just say things that are out and out wrong. Okay. Yeah. And those things need to be checked, and that's all good and fun. But there's a difference between that and you're not thinking like me, therefore this falls out of a particular category. That is a manipulation into a space of essentially an echo chamber that glorifies an individual thinker.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was going to add, so what happens is over the course of a 3-year journey, doesn't matter who you talk to in this group, they sound like him.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
The way they, you know, and I get there are elements like when you're at a specific church and your pastor preaches a certain way or has been, you know, nuances that can fluctuate. You know, I remember listening to Corey Russell, you know, and I would pick up nuances of Corey in his prayer. And so I get that.
Like mannerisms
or situations. This was not that. This is like having the image of this man. And going back to the 3 months where I'm about to leave and we're at the brink of she's staying, I'm going to take the kids and head out. That's how serious it was getting. Because when I started being told that I had to look like him, I looked that hard. I was like, the only one that I want to look like is Jesus.
Right.
Well, and Chris would also get compared in front of people like the group that he was looking like other men that were like considered disobedient in the group or that had left already because they have rebellious natures or demonic natures. And so Chris was always getting called out that he was like that stereotypical dude that was not wanting to fall in line.
The way I don't say no to say no to you, I'm clarifying. When I was compared to those that were already out of the group, there had been a couple that trickled off. There was no explanation of the comparison.
Why? Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's an open-ended interpretation. Like you can interpret. And this was on the major comparison was to a guy who just got imprisoned for a very serious crime.
Okay.
Yes. And so that comparison, you know, Chris is like so-and-so.
Wow.
Creates a narrative slowly. It's a slow play. Very methodical. And starts putting stuff out there to the group. No joke. Within a matter of 3 months, I would say my reputation, we're the oldest in the group, too. We move up here, and these kids are young kids. They're in their 20s, young 20s, mid-20s, maybe a couple late 20s.
Having babies, and we have
3 kids, you know. Our youngest is some of their oldest, you know, and so we come up here even with the mindset like we can help. Not to like lord over, that wasn't our goal.
So one of
big brother, big sister. Anyway, so as we move forward, Torie was like, because I was at a point where I was about to call not local leaders that were a couple hours away that knew who these leaders were. I was going to say, hey, this stuff's going on. Torie and I have been a part of a lot of healthy churches over our marriage. We were at Gateway for 8 years, and we were at another church called Convergence for a couple of years before Gateway. And then River of Glory, just kind of kicking off relationship. We've been at some great churches, seen some, healthy, unhealthy leadership dynamics. The stuff I was encountering, Royce, was off the charts. Never have experienced in any leadership setting.
And I wasn't experiencing what he was, so I didn't have that lens on me.
She was golden.
I was like, I'm going to be with you to stay. So I took Chris away to this literal secret garden. It is beautiful. It's like hidden with like a big pond, and it has like just mossy green everywhere.
It just has like a little river.
The sun is shining in. I mean, it's just the pristine day to take Chris, and I take him on this walk with me, and I sit on this table, and I told Chris, I was like, I reminded him of the words that we came up here on. And one of the words were that we were going to, well, did I share this word with you?
No, but because I was at the point of going back to Texas, not leave it all. I like, forget this.
Yeah.
I'm not a quitter either.
No.
I've never quit anything in my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because of so it goes back to socialization, as far as, my opinion is concerned, as far as the dynamics, the comparisons, the division, the propping up of, one in consideration to the other. The comparison thing, I think, is it's not interesting in the sense that it's like a positive interesting. It's interesting in the sense that it's like it's one of the most toxic ways in which you can embed an ideology to shade a particular person.
Absolutely.
Is to use named comparison to other figures or other, and you'll hear that people will, and this has become even kind of like a culture thing where, people will oftentimes compare someone to Hitler or some other, really horrible individual that maybe is more broadly known. And it's a part of socialization that's almost akin to reciprocity. So it's like, if you do these things, we get rewarded.
It's a pecking order.
Exactly. If you don't do these things, then you get punished. And some of the most brutal forms of that punishment isn't direct confrontation, because if someone isn't playing nice with the direct confrontation, meaning that they respond with the quote unquote, screw you, I'm not going to play your game, then there's this backdoor, this kind of adjacent social savaging that happens in kind of backdoor conversations. And so we're on a hot point of, I just kind of want to paint the picture, and then we're going to kind of wrap it up because we've got to move on to some questions that you guys got asked that I don't want to disregard to the individuals that asked them. And I think we got about another half hour, so we'll see where we go. But just to kind of recap, you guys are in Texas. You got the word. 2019, you move out. 2020, COVID hits the world. There's a whole bunch of crazy going on. You're in a different culture. You're engaging with these people that you had some experience getting to know a little bit, and you got to know their kind of day-to-day. There's the imposition of not only that new culture, but a whole new rule set and a whole new social reality that's, to be completely frank, quite odd. Not sure what to do with it yet. When you're on the ground, you're like, hey, we signed up for different. We just don't know if this is the kind of different that we signed up for. And then there's a internal feud of, hey, I kind of have this superiority because I'm being championed by the group and my husband's being kind of disregarded and thrown away by the group. And so we're going to do the initial intervention at the beautiful landscape of the Garden of Eden as recreated by the Carolinas landscape. And I think that's where we'll leave it for a moment. And then that's where we'll pick up the second conversation that we have. I don't know how we'll go as long as we want to and need to go. I do want to keep unpacking things as we go. I don't want to be long-winded with it though. But Torie, you'd sent me some questions that some people had sent both you and Chris do you want to go into that right now, or do you want me to pause and do we need to stop somewhere else for just a second?
I'm thinking if we just keep powering through the story, we'll do episode 3 on Q&A and questions and go deep into the dialogue of what
We
this
can do that.
after effects.
Yeah, I do know that just for compartmentalization purposes, it might be a good idea to do them episodically. For example, we're a little over an hour and 10 minutes right now. I don't think we're going to get through probably the next 6 months of the journey in the next 45. Or I've really got 35 minutes here to get that done, and I don't think we're going to get very far.
No.
And unless you guys have a different take on that, I think the questions would be a decent pivot.
I'm open to it. I mean, I want to keep the heartbeat of just like helping people and exposing what you can get yourself into if you don't pay attention to the red flags.
Yeah.
I think that's important for one, share our testimony and the life that has been after we've gotten out, but also give a glimpse on what to be aware of that is operating in the church today.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I think that's, a huge part of the value of not only a lived experience, but also the shared experience that, each person can glean from kind of what's going on in their own lives and kind of examine things with an exterior lens. Because I know that in part, you guys were kind of closeted off on purpose, but also there was like this there was this isolation, and there was also like this, like, okay, we'll go with that kept, individuals even like myself or, other people that were, really prominent in your lives from saying, hey, guys, what are we doing here? Obviously, like, let's get going. Let's do something different. But so that being said, you want to jump into a couple of these, or do you feel like we're getting ahead of the ball?
Let's get a few going, and then we'll, stop at that 2-hour marker and then go into the next episode with more info.
Okay. So let's look at, as far as synopsis is concerned, that's kind of where we'll leave off. And then picking up on some of the questions that you guys got a bunch of questions, but just to kind of bring things into the modern space, as you guys have talked about this a little bit, I know we teased out some things. I think there's been a little bit of conversations, but have you guys gotten any, kickback as far as, hey, this isn't something for people to, to be shared with other people from the group or different individuals that have been in the group? What's that been like? Has that been positive feedback? Hey, we want to learn too. We want to hear what other people have to say about how you guys have experienced this and learned from it, or has it been just negative or anything at all?
You want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I would say it's mixed. So we were told by leaders that know this group to really minimize and downplay what happened and shape it in such a way that it leaves out the negative parts and really highlights what the Lord has done. And Torie and I strongly disagreed because if you've ever read your Bible, the Old Testament is full of fullness of both the negative and the good. And so you see specific people, individuals, names, who threw Joseph in the pit. It didn't leave that out. It said his purpose threw Joseph in the pit. Who
Was trying to kill David.
Saul was trying to kill David. So, what they were asking us to do, I understood because it, I think, has been in the church for a long time. This, if you open up what happened to you, it's gossip, and it's actually not honoring the people anymore. So you're dishonoring and you're gossiping, and I'm like, that is not true, not true at all. These things personally happen to us. We're responsible for a couple things: forgiveness we are responsible to forgive. And then we have to walk out this healing process. But to stay on track with the question, that was one of the negative sides of like, hush, hush, be quiet, don't share this information. On the positive side, we have had people say, we want to know what happened to you. Tell us what's going on. You've been missing, essentially for 3 years. So
yeah, and we would also like kick back from the previous group that we were with. If we would put things on social media, we would get addressed by the leaders that we aligned ourselves with after we got out, by the group responding in such a way to our posts. We didn't reference them or anything, but we would put things that like processing out of, and it triggered them. And so we would say like, hey, this is what this is doing. It's affecting them. And the group is coiling back. They're recoiling. And we're like, we have nothing to do with that. We're posting what we are processing. This is them that they have to respond with. We're not trying to target them or anything. So the kickback was some of our social media posts that weren't approved, and we eventually blocked the whole group so they wouldn't see any of our stuff anymore, because we were just like, we don't want to.
We're not naming anybody specific.
No.
We weren't naming the group, nothing like that. It was just processing like, hey, for everyone who sent us out here, because we got sent by a big group of Christians, pastors and leaders, Pastor Paul Mintz, Gateway leaders, and just a lot of people surrounded us on this journey, family, moms, dads, grandparents. And so there's been a big disconnect over a 3-year period. So we put that social media update, kind of like a custom date. And, there was some pushback on just with updating people in our lives. I would say some more pushback was, upon exiting, we have been exiled. So, there was a absolute, like, no talk. Nobody wanted to talk to us about
no contact.
When we got out, we said, hey, listen, we're going to try to walk this process out. We're going to sit down with leaders and some witnesses. We want the leaders to understand why we fully left. But after the leaders hear it first from us, we're open to talk to everyone about what happened, why we left, and no contact. And we quite a few people on it during that time of just saying, seriously? You call us brothers and sisters.
And you haven't even checked on us since we've left. It was very grieving time.
Yeah, it always goes back to, maybe not always, but a lot of this goes back to the issues with governance. If you can't test and prove authority by appealing to a greater authority, then everything kind of goes out the window. It's like, how do you enact Matthew 18 principles? Because that's what's being referred to with the whole exiling or excommunicating, language is, it's a Matthew 18 principle, but there's no appeal outside of an individual and their objective lens on what's happening versus the very subjective reality of sin. And let's just be frank about everything. Matthew 18 does not apply when someone offends you, when they disagree with you, when they do something differently than you. Matthew 18 specifically applies to when a brother has sinned against you. Yeah. That criteria.
Yeah.
Well, if we're all honest, sin's a two-sided coin. It's commission and omission. And boy, oh boy, there's a whole lot to unpack there. But we all sin against each other. That no one is removed from that reality. We all miss the mark in some modicum or another. Yep. And so there's always this sense of humility that's appropriate, but in an authority to those who are under authority relationship, the way that you exercise authority is being the first to submit, is being the first to humble, being the first to admit, oh, I've wronged, oh, I've sinned. How can I learn? Help me understand. And unfortunately, and I get it because there's people who are, well, and I get it, and I'm not making an appeal for them. I'm just simply saying that, like, people will pull that trump card. They will. I mean, people have pulled that trump card with me when I'm literally just quoting the Bible. And so I get it when people use that kind of toxically. People who are maybe way more seasoned than, some of us, as far as, we haven't been in church a whole long time. We didn't grow up learning how to stab each other in the back using scripture. And I get it. People that happens. Unfortunately, it's a thing.
Just note,
But
this is the first time Torie and I have ever tried to walk out Matthew 18. That's in 15 years of marriage. Never have we ever had to walk out Matthew 18. This was the first time experience. Never been sinned against in this regard to this magnitude.
yeah.
So,
And I think my point is if there's no recognition of that on leadership part, you've always done, you can always do something better. You can always do something that reflects Jesus more accurately. And as leadership in a church or in a spiritual authoritative space, you have to have that posture and that humility to say, okay, I need to repent. I need to be better, and I need to learn when there's even if it's a lie. Now, I'm not saying give in to lies, but I am saying that if there's something even within an accusation that's not true or accurate, what gave rise to that, and how can we learn from it? And just taking that posture is always the correct way to respond, and doing so in love, not allowing for untruth or lies to take place or to be allowed. That's not what I'm saying at all. But to say, let me see this from your perspective. It's literally the root of understanding. It's the submission of standing to see from another's perspective. So then that, as far as the pushback is concerned, obviously none of it gets a foothold if there's a different perspective of some of these situations, and been referred to as flags, red flags, purple burning flags. What's your guys' take, advice on how to soberly assess red flags when entering into a community, a new group, or even in this situation, a whole new social life?
Don't ignore them and run to the hills. But really, like, a multitude of counsel is what we leaned into before we got out. And thank God we listened to other people's voices, because we were highly encouraged to only listen to the counsel that we were in with our group.
yeah.
So the fact that we kind of went outside the circle was like a no-no. And we actually got talked to about that even while leaving upon the group. Like, why didn't you guys come and talk to us? Y'all were not trustworthy. And one, we didn't have an issue. We had an issue with the leader. So therefore, you have no part of the solution to our problem. But when we were getting counsel, I think the whole process, you need to have that board of people that you can go to and trust to speak into your life with those red flags. And we did. On our whole journey, we had a few hand reserved people that we would talk to. Thank the Lord that they would listen to us, and they would give sound counsel, wisdom, advice, and they would also take a neutral seat and give us the opportunity to grow and learn, where we could bounce it back with the Holy Spirit and one another and say, let's take a deeper look at it. Like let's look again and see if this is something that we need to change, or if this is our leaders that are operating in a way that is abusive. Or so that was a huge thing when we were dealing with red flags.
Chris, what about you?
Anything? Yeah, I think the multitude of counsel for sure. We got chastised for having outside counsel. It was regularly told that we should only listen to one stream. Don't have multiple streams of the Christian,
because that can bring confusion, or
IHOP or Bill Johnson, or any of the charismatic streams, except Glory of Zion and the leaders.
Hmm.
And to go get counsel outside of your brothers and sisters in this group was we broke covenant. It's like we broke trust. We didn't trust them. That's why we didn't.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I would say to avoid getting into a group like this, talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to those that you trust and love. If you don't have anyone like that in your life, because I get it, there are some people who are on this journey kind of more isolated,
Yeah.
soloed. I would say if you start recognizing yellow flags before they're red, contact a church and just run them past a local church,
Yeah, I would even say if it's, I mean, and I don't mean to stranglehold things in this position like it's the only way that this works in a healthy way, but in my experience and opinion, if it's not connected to a local church who has a strong and healthy sense of governance, what I mean by a strong and healthy sense of governance, just to delineate that down a little bit further, is that there's a board or a group of individuals that do not cater to the individual who preaches on a Sunday morning. That person should not be the final yes and amen and rule of law within a church. I love pastors. I love preaching. I love being a preacher. I love getting to do life with these people and serve them. I've never met a one of them who was actually Jesus. Me and my family, happen to be in an amazing leadership culture. We've been, very, in a lot of ways, starkly opposite to you guys. God just knows that I need a lot of help. And so he reserves the kind of the least tests for me. And so he put me with some of the best leadership, in my opinion, on the planet. And, one of the things that I guess kind of is one of those yellow flags is, look for when, maybe the slap on the hand is way harder than the transgression that caused it. When I think about listening to other perspectives on the gospel or perspectives on preaching or perspectives on church or whatever, like that should never be threatening. That should never be, in my opinion, discouraged. I mean, even because like people can have heretical thoughts, and I'll tie this into a larger principle in a second. People can have heretical thoughts. I mean, people ask me my opinion on all kinds of different preachers, and I just always tell them the same thing. Like, hey, we're all human, number one. Number two, the less we understand our humanity, the bigger red flag that is, in my opinion. The more we try to stand up and say, I have the word from, it's like, dude, okay, we all have the Bible. All right, just let's go that direction with it.
Yeah.
But then also too, like if someone's threatened by an outside perspective and not like, hey, like help me understand what that means. And because we can all have a thought that goes sideways. We can all say words or sentences or paragraphs even sometimes that go sideways. It doesn't mean that the whole thing's bad.
Right.
You lean into what God speaks through and what God inspires, and what's accurate to his word as best you understand it, and then you throw the rest out. And it's as easy as that. If you can do that. Now, if you're in a space where you're maybe not spiritually strong enough to do that, well, first of all, you certainly need to be in a very strong community with somebody who has a leadership board that is not a echo chamber or a yes man board, because you're in a space where you're feeble. And so, and it's not just that way in what we say, but also what we do. So I'll kind of wrap things up this way, because I don't know any of the individuals that you're talking about. I don't know people's names. I don't know faces. I don't know anything. But here's what I know about human beings. A lot of times we start with really great motives, and some of those motives get captured by our own self-centered reality. And that happens to everyone from bosses to employees to, all the way to the extremes.
Yeah.
And our experience of those as individuals is our experience of those as individuals. I think we do our best when we learn from those experiences. Do I think anyone set out to harm you? No, probably not. Did things harm you though? Yes. At a certain point in time, were those things pointed? purposeful and driven by spiritual factors that had to do with people's own inadequacies and insecurities and need for control? Yeah, absolutely. Again, I just point back to Ephesians 6. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. And I know that none of us, if a third of the angels fell, none of us is greater than succumbing to the temptations that the enemy throws at us, and he knows how to throw them because he's been doing this for a really long time. So we do have moments of weakness. We just can't allow moments of weakness to then become seasons of arrogance coupled with ignorance in how we govern or lead people that we lead. And when those principles are transgressed, I think those are some of the yellow flags that people need to watch out for. When there's a lack of humility, a lack of admittance of ignorance, and then action that speaks more to somebody's own control mechanisms than it does for the good of others, you're on shaky ground, and you need to be very prayerful.
In a place where your questions are being resisted or flipped back onto you. Yellow flag.
Well, and I would say this, and as a leader who may find themselves getting asked questions often, just look, one of the first rules to answering questions is learning how to say these words. I don't know. A lot of times the way I say it, I'll say is, I don't know completely, but here's some thoughts I have in part. Because a lot of people aren't so much incorrect as they are incomplete. Now, to be fair, being incorrect ultimately leaves a lot of room to recognize ignorance, but incomplete does too. As an individual, if you understand, maybe my thought, my conclusion, my idea isn't complete, then there's room for me to understand where I'm ignorant. But then there's just times where you're just incorrect from the get. And it is incorrect on how it lands. And you can tell because of how it develops the relationships that are in your life. And if the relationships in your life look more like you than they do like Jesus, or you think you look so much like Jesus that everyone needs to look like you need a healthy dose of a very heavy cross.
Yeah.
And the fortunate and unfortunate reality is that the Lord is very good, and he delivers exactly that. So all that need.
Right.
And that's what we put our trust in. And that's where our hope goes, not in that we can vindicate ourselves, but that the Lord ultimately is the distributor of all justice. And it's through his love. And we try to reflect that as best we can. Guys, I love you so much. I appreciate you guys. I can't wait to hear what happens from the garden to the next several years. And I want to dive a lot more into also how your relationship with your kids formed their lives in the midst of all this too. So I'm super excited to hear the next time we get the chance to have this conversation. You guys have anything closing?
No, I mean, I would say just, again, the closing thought would just be, again, if there's anything that you have questioned, like in your gut, the intuition by the Holy Spirit, like do not ignore it. In that first phase, for me, I would say the first 3 months, I did not lean heavily into my husband's leadership. I just trusted blindly another man's leadership. And so we'll dive more into the next episode. But for me, like, always follow your husband, especially a godly man.
I'd say that caveat's very important. To follow your husband as long as your husband's following God. We can get into that next episode, but very important caveat, but very, very, very healthy information. And for sure.
To be a defender of her, they convinced her I wasn't following. So, which if you know me, that's just the silly. And she knows. I mean, there's been a lot of healing and restoration. My closing thoughts. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for where we are today, And this is a forming testimony that is going to not only has equipped us to help others in the body and be able to discern things moving forward, but also to shed light
Yeah.
on what is hidden. And we'll get a lot deeper into the next episode for sure.
Yeah. I just want to say one closing thing, and that is, if you find yourself in a tricky situation, you can always send us a message. Here's what I'm going to say to that, though, is that if you do send us a message, don't necessarily expect a reply or an answer to that issue or that concern. But what you can expect is for us to pray for you and to know that you have those that are in prayer with you. I know how tricky and two-sided this sword can become as far as trying to be the Holy Spirit for other people. We have no intention or desire to do that, but we do want to stand with you in prayer. And so if you're in that situation, you would like to receive prayer, or you're just needing to kind of talk some things out in a space that people on the other end of it will take to the Lord, then we'd love to hear that from you and see God move in however he does in your life. And so all that being said, love you guys so much. Chris, Torie, love you guys so much. I'm so proud of you guys, not for all this stuff, but just because I've seen many, many, many a marriage fall and crumble under way lesser weight. And so to see your unity and to see your love for each other, I've known you since day one. Between me and Jesus, we're primarily responsible for the lives of your children. No, I'm playing, but in getting to be a pivotal part of your guys' story, I'm super proud of you guys. Just to see you hand in hand and going through, having gone through what you guys have gone through, and just sticking to Jesus and really clinging to him desperately. So love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.